Before shepherds spread the news, before kings felt threatened, before blood was spilled in Bethlehem, a question was asked that shook the ancient world. It did not come from prophets. It did not come from priests. It came from the east. Where is the king? This is not the soft, familiar nativity story you think you know. This is a journey of scholars who read the sky, crossed empires, confronted power, and knelt before a child who redefined what kingship truly means. A story of stars that spoke, thrones that trembled, and wisdom that chose obedience over safety. Tonight, we uncover the complete story of the wise men, like you've never seen it before. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe for more powerful biblical stories, and share it with someone who loves history, faith, and truth. Now, let's follow the star. Long before a star pierced the night sky over Judea, long before gifts were laid before a child in a humble house, the story of the wise men was already unfolding in silence. It began not in Bethlehem, not even in Israel, but in the vast intellectual and spiritual landscapes of the ancient East, where knowledge was power, stars were messages, and wisdom was pursued with a devotion that bordered on the sacred. To understand the wise men, we must first understand their world. The men later called magi did not emerge from myth or folklore. They belonged to a real tradition, one respected and feared across empires. In the ancient Near East, the magi were scholars, priestly intellectuals, astronomers, dream interpreters, and custodians of sacred knowledge. Kings consulted them, empires relied on them. They were trained to observe patterns, especially in the heavens, believing that the cosmos was not random, but ordered, intentional, and communicative. Their homeland lay east of Judea, in regions shaped by the legacies of Babylon and the imperial structures of Persia. These were civilizations where astronomy and theology were inseparable. The sky was a scroll written by the divine. Stars were not worshipped, but read. Movements of planets, conjunctions, and rare celestial phenomena were recorded meticulously, generation after generation, forming libraries of astronomical wisdom unmatched in the ancient world. This matters because the wise men were not stargazers chasing beauty. They were disciplined observers searching for meaning. When they studied the heavens, they did so with expectation that history itself could be announced from above. Centuries earlier, Jewish exiles had lived among these same Eastern cultures. Their scriptures traveled with them. Stories of a promised ruler, a Messiah, a king arising from the line of David, did not remain confined to Israel. They were discussed, debated, and preserved in foreign lands. One ancient prophecy spoke of a ruler whose coming would be marked by a star, a symbol deeply resonant to those trained to read the skies. Over time, fragments of Hebrew hope mingled with Eastern scholarship, forming a quiet anticipation that a world-altering king would one day be revealed. The Magi were heirs to this fusion of knowledge. They did not merely inherit charts and calculations. They inherited expectation. In their academies and temples, the wise men studied night after night. Oil lamps flickered over stone tablets etched with observations. Apprentices memorized the language of the stars. Elders debated interpretations. They believed that heaven and earth were in dialogue, and that sometimes the sky spoke loudly. Then, on one extraordinary night, it did. Something appeared that defied routine explanation. Not a wandering planet behaving as expected, not a familiar cycle repeating itself. This was different, distinct, arresting, impossible to ignore. The heavens had shifted in a way that demanded interpretation. To untrained eyes, it may have seemed like just another light. To the Magi, it was a declaration. A king had been born, not in their land, not in their empire, but somewhere west, toward Judea, toward the ancient promises whispered through foreign texts and exiled traditions. The star did not simply sparkle, it summoned, it carried purpose, and the Magi, trained their entire lives for moments like this, understood the cost of ignoring such a sign. Yet knowledge alone did not move them to action. Many scholars observe, few obey. What separated these men from countless others who studied the sky was courage. To follow the star meant leaving status, security, and reputation. It meant crossing deserts and borders, traveling into politically unstable territories. It meant approaching foreign rulers with a dangerous question: where is the king who has been born? This was not curiosity, it was allegiance, preparing for the journey required intention. Caravans were assembled, supplies calculated, gifts selected with symbolic care. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh were not random luxuries, they were statements. Gold for royalty, frankincense for worship, myrrh for mortality. Even before they met the child, the magi were declaring who they believed him to be. Their journey would take months, possibly more than a year, across deserts where the sun scorched resolve, through territories governed by suspicion. Each step was guided by a light that seemed to move with intention, leading them closer not just to a destination, but to a confrontation with power, fear, and prophecy. Unbeknownst to them, their arrival would shake palaces, their question would disturb a throne, their obedience would expose the insecurity of a tyrant and the humility of a king born without walls or armies. But all of that lay ahead, for now, the wise men stood at the edge of decision, between comfort and calling, between observation and obedience. The star burned steadily above them, patient yet insistent, as if waiting to see whether wisdom would recognize its moment, and they chose to follow. The road westward stretched long and unforgiving. Day after day, the wise men traveled beneath merciless sun and restless stars, guided by a light that seemed both distant and intimate, fixed yet alive. Their caravan moved with purpose, cutting through deserts and trade routes, passing villages that barely noticed them, unaware that history itself was riding quietly through their dust-filled streets. At last, the familiar outline of a great city rose on the horizon. This was not the modest village the star had whispered toward. This was Jerusalem, a city crowned with walls, politics, and fear. To the Magi, it seemed logical. If a king had been born, surely he would be found in a palace. Surely his arrival would have stirred celebration, trumpets, and public proclamation. They were wrong. The wise men entered Jerusalem openly, confidently, and with dangerous innocence. Their question echoed through corridors and courtyards, through markets and administrative halls. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. It was not whispered. It was announced. Jerusalem froze. In a city where rumors traveled faster than messengers. The question reached the palace with alarming speed, and there, seated on a throne built on blood and paranoia, was Herod the Great. Herod was no stranger to threats. He had secured his power through brutality, eliminating rivals, including members of his own family, at the slightest hint of disloyalty. He ruled Judea not by love, but by terror carefully disguised as stability. Rome had given him authority, but fear kept him alive. And now, foreign scholars from the East were asking about a new king. The text says Herod was disturbed. That word barely scratches the surface. He was shaken to his core. A king born without his permission was not merely a theological problem. It was a political nightmare. Herod summoned the chief priests and scribes, men steeped in ancient scripture, and demanded answers. Where was the Messiah to be born? Where did prophecy say this rival would appear? Their response was precise and unsettling. The writings pointed not to Jerusalem, but to Bethlehem, a small town, insignificant on the world stage. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, the prophecy declared, are by no means least. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people. A ruler, a shepherd, not a tyrant, not a usurper, something far more dangerous. Herod's fear hardened into calculation. He summoned the wise men privately, his voice measured, his smile practiced. He asked them when the star had first appeared, extracting timelines, details, anything he could weaponize. Then he sent them onward with feigned piety. Go and search carefully for the child, he said. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. But this was no worship. It was surveillance. The wise men left the palace unaware of how close death now stalked the child they sought. Jerusalem, the city of promise, had not rejoiced at the birth of its king. It had trembled. Power does not welcome replacement. Thrones do not celebrate succession unless it is controlled. Asterisk, asterisk. As the Magi departed the city, something extraordinary happened. The star appeared again, not faint, not distant, but clear, reassuring, as if acknowledging their obedience and correcting their assumption. The palace was not the destination. Politics was not the pathway. The star led them away from Jerusalem's grandeur toward Bethlehem's quiet obscurity. This moment marked a turning point in the story. The wise men had entered Jerusalem with expectation and left with clarity. Kings were not always found where power gathered. Truth did not always reside where authority shouted the loudest. As they traveled south, anticipation grew. The text tells us they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy when they saw the star. These were men trained in restraint, in discipline, in controlled interpretation. Yet now, their joy overflowed. The journey was nearly complete. What awaited them was not what their training predicted. They did not find armies. They did not find ceremony. They did not find a crowned infant flanked by officials. They found a child, a family, a house. No spectacle, no guards, no visible claim to power. And yet, something within them recognized what the world could not. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, and they fell down. This detail matters. These were not desperate peasants seeking hope. These were dignified scholars, honored advisors to kings, men accustomed to standing in the presence of rulers. Yet before this child, they collapsed to the ground. Knowledge bowed to revelation. Wisdom yielded to truth incarnate. They opened their treasures. Gold shimmered in the lamplight, fit for a king. Frankincense released its fragrance, fit for worship. Myrrh, heavy and foreboding, fit for death. The gifts preached what words did not. This child was king, God, and sacrifice. The world outside remained unaware. Jerusalem slept uneasily. Herod plotted, but in that quiet house, prophecy breathed. That night, the wise men dreamed. They were warned, not by stars, not by scrolls, but by divine interruption, not to return to Herod. Power had revealed its intent. Innocence was in danger. Obedience now required defiance. So they departed by another route, different roads, different futures. Changed men, they returned east carrying no relics, no proof to display. What they carried instead was far heavier. The knowledge that they had stood in the presence of a king whose reign would not mirror Rome, whose throne would not resemble Herod's, and whose power would outlast every empire they had ever known. The wise men disappeared into the eastern horizon under cover of obedience. But the silence they left behind was anything but peaceful. In Jerusalem, something dark had been set in motion. The city that trembled before now waited. And in the palace, a king watched the days pass with growing suspicion. Herod the Great was many things: brilliant, ruthless, politically shrewd, but patience was not among his virtues. Each sunrise without word from the Magi sharpened his fear. Each passing night fed his imagination. The foreign scholars had not returned. The silence spoke clearly. They had chosen allegiance over obedience to him. Herod understood betrayal. He also understood threats. The star had exposed something he could not control. The prophecies had confirmed it. A rival king had been born, not raised by armies, not installed by Rome, but announced by heaven itself. And heaven did not answer to Herod. When power feels cornered, it does not reflect, it retaliates. Herod's response was swift and merciless. He calculated the timeline given by the wise men, estimating the child's age. Then he issued an order that would stain his reign forever. All male children in and around Bethlehem, 2 years old and under, were to be killed. It was not warfare, it was slaughter. Bethlehem, a town that had quietly hosted wonder, now echoed with screams. Mothers clutched infants. Soldiers showed no hesitation, no trial, no mercy. The king's fear became a blade, and innocence paid the price. History would remember this moment, not for Herod's strength, but for his terror. This was the true nature of threatened power. It destroys what it cannot dominate. Yet even as violence unfolded, another story was moving beneath the surface, one unseen by soldiers and unrecorded by royal decrees. Before Herod's order reached its full force, another warning came. This time not to scholars, but to a carpenter. In a dream, divine urgency broke into sleep. The message was simple and immediate. Get up, take the child and his mother and flee. No explanation, no negotiation. Danger was already advancing. And so, under the cover of night, the child the wise men had worshipped became a refugee. Joseph gathered what little they could carry. Mary wrapped her son tightly. No procession marked their departure. No star guided them publicly now. The road ahead led southwest, away from Judea, away from Herod's reach, toward Egypt. Egypt, the place of ancient bondage, became a place of refuge. The irony is striking. Centuries earlier, Israel had fled from Egypt in search of freedom. Now, Israel's true king fled to Egypt to survive. History folded in on itself. Patterns repeated, but with deeper meaning. This child's life was already retracing the story of his people, not from a throne, but from exile. Meanwhile, Bethlehem mourned. The prophecy spoken long before found its echo in tears. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. The world rarely notices when the powerless suffer, but heaven records every cry. The story of the wise men does not end in soft candlelight. It passes through blood-soaked streets and broken homes. This is essential to understand. The coming of the true king did not immediately remove violence, it exposed it. It drew out the cruelty of false power and revealed the cost of fear-driven rule. Herod's massacre did not stop prophecy. It fulfilled the pattern that power always reveals its weakness when threatened by truth. Eventually, Herod died, alone, diseased, paranoid to the end. His kingdom fractured almost immediately. The throne he clung to could not save him. History moved on without him, but the child lived. After Herod's death, another dream came. The danger had passed. Joseph was told to return, not to Jerusalem, though that city remained dangerous, but to the quiet northern town of Nazareth. Again, obscurity became protection. Again, humility shielded destiny. The wise men never appear again in the biblical record. Their role was complete. They had followed revelation, honored truth, and disappeared into history without applause. Yet their obedience had consequences that rippled outward, awakening fear in a tyrant, fulfilling prophecy, and forcing the world to reveal what it does when confronted with a king it cannot control. This section of the story strips away romanticism. It reminds us that divine intervention does not always look like immediate peace. Sometimes it looks like escape. Sometimes it looks like grief. Sometimes it looks like survival. And sometimes the most powerful act is not to fight, but to endure. By the time the wise men vanish from the narrative, they have already become legends. Over centuries, tradition would reshape them into kings, name them, dress them in crowns, and assign them races and realms. But the original story is far more intriguing than the legend, and far more disruptive. To understand its power, we must strip away later ornamentation and return to the men themselves. The gospel text never calls them kings, it calls them magi. This word carried weight in the ancient world. It referred not to mystics dabbling in superstition, but to a recognized scholarly class, men trained rigorously in astronomy, sacred texts, philosophy, and ritual interpretation. In many Eastern cultures, magi functioned as priest-scholars, advisors to rulers, and guardians of cosmic order. They studied how heaven and earth interacted, believing that history followed intelligible patterns revealed through science. Their roots most likely lay in the priestly traditions of ancient Persia, deeply shaped by Zoroastrianism. This faith emphasized cosmic dualism, light versus darkness, truth versus deception, and held a strong expectation of a future savior figure who would renew the world. Such ideas primed the Magi to take prophecy seriously. To believe that time itself moved toward fulfillment. This is crucial. The wise men were not Jews. They were outsiders, Gentiles, foreign intellectuals whose worldview, while disciplined, was not formed by Israel's covenantal law. And yet, they recognized something that many insiders missed, that the birth of a child in Judea was not a local event, but a cosmic one. How many were there? The text never says. 3 gifts are mentioned, not 3 men. They may have traveled as a larger delegation, scholars, servants, guards, enough to attract attention in Jerusalem and merit a private audience with a king. What mattered was not their number, but their agreement. Independent observers had reached the same conclusion. Heaven had announced a king. This raises an uncomfortable question. Why were foreigners the first to recognize him? Israel had prophets, scriptures, temples, priests. Yet, when the Messiah arrived, it was Eastern scholars, trained to read stars, who traveled hundreds of miles to honor him. Meanwhile, Jerusalem trembled. Herod plotted. Religious leaders quoted prophecy, but did not move their feet. The contrast is intentional. The story exposes a pattern repeated throughout history. Proximity to truth does not guarantee recognition of it. Familiarity can dull expectation. Those who think they already know what God must do often miss what God actually does. The Magi, however, were open. They did not control prophecy. They responded to it. They did not demand the king appear on their terms. They adjusted their journey to follow revelation. When the star led them away from palaces to a house, they did not protest. They bowed. This posture of learned humility is what defines true wisdom in the story. Their gifts deepen this meaning. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh were not simply valuable commodities. They were theological statements. Gold acknowledged kingship. Frankincense, used in worship, acknowledged divinity. Myrrh, associated with burial, acknowledged suffering and death. Together, the gifts declared a paradox. This child was born to rule, to be worshipped, and to die. No angel explained this to them. No sermon instructed them. They discerned it. And when they received a warning in a dream that to return to Herod, they obeyed immediately. This detail is often overlooked, but it is decisive. The Magi trusted revelation even when it contradicted political authority. They chose the safety of a child over the favor of a king. For scholars accustomed to advising power, this was a radical reordering of allegiance. After that, they exit the stage. No farewell speech, no recorded reflections. They returned to their home unchanged, carrying a truth that could not be measured, charted, or contained in their libraries. Their silence is part of their testimony. They had seen enough. Over time, the church would imagine them as kings because it seemed fitting. Yet the irony remains. They were wiser than kings precisely because they were willing to kneel. They remind us that the world's most important revelations are not always entrusted to those at the center of religious or political power, but to those attentive enough to follow the light they are given. The story also widens the meaning of the Messiah's birth. From the beginning, this was never a parochial event. The Magi's presence declares that the child in Bethlehem belonged not only to Israel, but to the world. Nations were summoned before shepherds finished telling their story. The gospel was global before it was local. In this sense, the wise men stand at the crossroads of history. They represent the longings of the nations, the search of human reason, the hope that truth is discoverable, and that when it is found, it demands response. They did not have complete understanding. They had enough to leave, enough to follow, enough to worship, enough to disobey a tyrant. And that was sufficient. Of all the elements in the story of the wise men, none has captured imagination, debate, and speculation quite like the star. It shines above every nativity scene, crowns countless works of art, and anchors the entire journey of the Magi. Yet the star was not a decorative miracle placed in the sky for beauty alone. It was a message, intelligible, intentional, and precise enough to move trained scholars across continents. To understand the star, we must first understand the minds that noticed it. The wise men were astronomers, not astrologers in the modern trivial sense. They did not glance at the sky for vague omens. They studied patterns over decades, recorded cycles, and knew the heavens intimately. This is why the star mattered. Whatever appeared that night was not part of the normal rhythm of the sky. It disrupted expectation. Ancient records show that Eastern scholars paid particular attention to rare planetary conjunctions, moments when planets appeared to align in striking ways. Such events were not seen as random, but symbolic, especially when they occurred in constellations associated with kingship or specific nations. Some scholars believe the star may have been a remarkable alignment involving Jupiter, long associated with royalty, in relation to regions linked symbolically with Judea. Others suggest a comet or a supernova, a sudden light appearing where none had been before. The gospel itself does not settle the debate, and that silence may be deliberate. The point is not what the star was, but what it did. It communicated. The wise men interpreted it as the birth announcement of a king, not a general ruler, not a seasonal omen, a specific, historical arrival. The star functioned like a summons, written in the language they understood best. God spoke to them not through Torah or prophets, but through the sky they had spent their lives studying. This reveals something profound. Revelation meets people where they are. Without endorsing everything they believe, the magi's tools were redeemed, not rejected. Their learning became a pathway, rather than an obstacle. Yet the star behaved unlike any ordinary celestial object. It appeared, disappeared, reappeared. It guided, not merely marked. After Jerusalem, it did not remain static. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. The language is almost personal, as though the light possessed intention. This challenges purely natural explanations. The story suggests a convergence, a real astronomical event paired with divine guidance. Nature and purpose overlapped. Heaven used creation as a signpost. The cosmos itself bent, not to dominate humanity, but to invite response. Importantly, the star did not lead the wise men all the way. It brought them to Jerusalem, but there it ceased. This pause forced them into human interaction, scripture, and political reality. Revelation alone did not complete the journey. Interpretation, risk, and discernment were required, and they made a mistake. Assuming the king would be found in a palace, they asked the wrong people. That error had consequences, triggering Herod's violence. The story does not hide this. Following divine signs does not make one infallible. Even sincere seekers can misinterpret the path, yet grace continued to guide them. When they left Jerusalem, the star reappeared, not as condemnation, but as confirmation. The joy they felt was overwhelming, suggesting relief, reassurance, and renewal of trust. Heaven had not abandoned them because of one misstep. The journey continued. There is also something humbling about the star's selectivity. It was not noticed by everyone. Jerusalem did not see it. Herod had to ask when it appeared. The religious leaders did not follow it. The sign was public in one sense, but meaningful only to those trained to read it. Revelation is often like that. It shines for all, but speaks clearly to few. When the wise men finally arrived and worshipped the child, the star fades from the story. Its purpose was complete. It had not demanded attention for itself. It did not linger for applause. Like all true signs, it pointed beyond itself and then stepped aside. The star's role reminds us that God's guidance is rarely about spectacle. It is about direction. It invites movement, not admiration, and it often works through means that appear ordinary until they are interpreted rightly. In this sense, the star was not an anomaly. It was a continuation of a pattern. A burning bush, a pillar of fire, a still small voice, different forms, same intent, to guide humanity toward encounter. The wise men followed the light they were given, not knowing the full story. They did not demand certainty before obedience. They did not wait for consensus. They moved, and in moving, they encountered truth in flesh and blood. When the wise men entered the house and bowed before the child, they did not speak recorded words. No dialogue is preserved. No sermon is delivered. Instead, they opened their treasures, In the ancient world, gifts were never neutral. They were language. They declared intention, recognized status, and revealed understanding. What the Magi placed before the child in Bethlehem was not generosity alone. It was confession. Gold came first. Gold was the universal symbol of kingship. It belonged in treasuries, crowns, and thrones. It funded armies and built empires. To offer gold to a child was to acknowledge sovereignty before power was visible. This was not charity, it was tribute. The wise men were declaring that authority rested here. Not in Jerusalem, not in Rome, not in the palaces they had left behind. In a quiet house, kingship had appeared without permission from any empire. This alone was revolutionary. Then came frankincense. Frankincense was costly, rare, and sacred. It was burned in worship, its smoke rising as a symbol of prayer and divine presence. In the Hebrew temple, frankincense was reserved for God. It was never offered to human rulers. By laying it before the child, the Magi crossed a theological boundary. They were not merely honoring a future king, they were acknowledging something transcendent. This child belonged not only to earth, but to heaven. Without a single spoken creed, the wise men were declaring divinity. Then came myrrh. Myrrh was the most unsettling gift of all. It was used in burial practices, in embalming, in preparing bodies for death. It was associated with suffering, mortality, and grief. No parent would expect such a gift at a child's birth. Yet the Magi offered it deliberately. They recognized that this king's destiny was inseparable from suffering, that his victory would not come through conquest, but through sacrifice. Taken together, the gifts formed a theology. *** king, God, suffering servant, long before sermons were preached, before miracles were performed, before a cross was raised. These truths were declared silently by foreign scholars, kneeling on a dirt floor. The irony is striking. Those with the least access to Israel's scriptures articulated the heart of its hope with astonishing clarity. There is another layer often missed. These gifts were practical. Gold financed survival. Frankincense and myrrh were trade commodities, valuable and portable. When the family fled to Egypt, these treasures may well have sustained them in exile. The Magi's worship did not end in symbolism. It enabled protection. Reverence became provision. This is how divine economy often works. What honors God also sustains life. The gifts also reveal something about how the wise men understood power. They did not bring weapons, treaties, or political pledges. They brought submission. In a world where kings measured strength by domination, these scholars redefined greatness as worthiness to be worshipped. And then they left. No attempt to control the narrative, no effort to remain influential, no desire to stay close to power. They departed by another road, their obedience now complete. The gifts remained behind, silently shaping a future no one present could yet imagine. Mary likely did not fully understand them. Joseph probably wondered what they meant. The child, of course, was unaware. Meaning often arrives before understanding. Years later, echoes of those gifts would return. Gold would contrast sharply with a crown of thorns. Frankincense would echo in prayers offered in agony. Myrrh would appear again at the end, when a body was taken down from a cross and prepared for burial. The wise men's offering framed the entire life of Jesus from beginning to end. Birth and death were linked from the start. Glory and suffering were never separated. This was not an accident. It was revelation ahead of time. There is also a sobering implication. The Magi recognized what Herod rejected. They honored what Jerusalem feared. Their gifts forced a choice. Either this child redefined power, or power would try to destroy him. Neutrality was impossible. That remains true. The story challenges how people approach truth. Some come to extract advantage. Some come to eliminate threat. The wise men came to give, to surrender their wealth, status, and certainty before something greater than themselves. This is why their story endures. They remind us that true wisdom does not merely observe, it responds. It does not hoard insight, it offers it. And it understands that the greatest realities are often recognized not through control, but through humility. By the time the wise men disappear from the narrative, the gifts remain as silent witnesses. They have spoken more than words ever could. They have announced the kind of king the child will be, the kind of God he reveals, and the kind of path he will walk. The encounter between the wise men and the child in Bethlehem did only a moment, yet its implications stretched across centuries. In that quiet exchange, knees bent, gifts offered, silence heavy with meaning, the very definition of kingship was rewritten. The ancient world did not realize it yet, but power had just been redefined, and no empire would ever fully recover from the shift. In the world the Magi came from, kings ruled by dominance. Authority was proven through conquest, wealth, and fear. Palaces were built to intimidate. Thrones were secured through bloodlines and violence. Rome perfected this system, Persia refined it, and local rulers like Herod embodied its darkest excesses. Power flowed downward, obedience was extracted, yet the wise men bowed before a child with no army, no crown, no visible claim to rule. This act alone was subversive. By recognizing kingship in weakness, the Magi exposed the fragility of every throne built on force. They demonstrated that legitimacy does not originate in violence, but in worth, that a ruler could command allegiance not by threat, but by truth. In doing so, they aligned themselves with a kingdom that would not expand through borders, but through hearts. This helps explain why Herod reacted with such brutality. The child did not threaten him militarily. There was no uprising, no manifesto, no rebellion, but the idea of a king who ruled without fear was more dangerous than any army. Herod understood instinctively that power based on terror cannot coexist with power based on love. One must destroy the other. The Magi's worship made that conflict unavoidable. From this moment on, the story of Jesus unfolds in constant tension with worldly definitions of authority. He would grow up in obscurity, speak with authority, eject political office, perform miracles without exploiting them, and challenge systems without leading armies. When crowds tried to make him king by force, he withdrew. When questioned by governors, he refused to play their games. His kingdom did not look like a threat, until it was. The wise men, whether they knew it or not, were the first to model how this kingdom would be entered, not through lineage, not through citizenship, not through power, but through recognition and response. They came from afar, crossing boundaries of culture, religion, and politics, drawn not by coercion, but by truth. This universality matters. From its earliest moments, the story declares that this king does not belong to one nation alone. The Magi represent the nations, the intellectual, the spiritual, the searching world beyond Israel. Their presence signals that the kingdom being born will gather people not by conquest, but by invitation. This was radical in the ancient world. Most empires expanded by absorbing or crushing others. This kingdom would expand by persuasion, transformation, and self-giving love. Its citizens would not be conscripted, they would be convinced. Its victories would be internal before they were visible, and that frightened those in power. The Magi left without weapons, but they carried a truth that would outlast swords. Somewhere east of Judea, they returned to their communities as changed men. We are not told what they taught, but silence does not mean absence. Ideas travel quietly, stories spread, seeds are planted. By the time Christianity would later emerge into the public sphere, the idea that ultimate authority belonged to a crucified and rising king would shake Rome to its foundations. Emperors would persecute, then attempt to co-opt, then finally kneel to the very name they once outlawed. The process was slow, uneven, and often corrupted, but the direction was irreversible. The wise men stand at the beginning of that arc. They remind us that history is often turned not by armies, but by moments of recognition, by people who see something true and respond faithfully, even when the world around them does not understand. Their story also confronts modern assumptions. Many still expect power to look impressive, loud, and dominant. The wise men challenge that instinct. They ask whether we are willing to recognize truth when it arrives without spectacle, whether we can honor wisdom that does not flatter our expectations, because the greatest irony remains: the most powerful king the world has known did not sit on a throne that night, yet wise men still found him worthy of worship. And that question echoes forward through time. If power is redefined as service, if greatness is measured by humility, if authority flows from truth rather than fear, then every empire must be re-evaluated, every throne questioned, every allegiance examined. The wise men appear briefly in the story of Jesus, and then they are gone. No genealogy follows them. No later encounter records their voices again. Scripture offers no epilogue describing their return home, no account of how they were received, no record of whether anyone believed them. And yet, few figures in the entire nativity narrative have left a deeper, more enduring imprint, because the wise men did not just follow a star, they asked a question that history has never been able to silence. Where is the king? It was a simple question, but it carried explosive implications. It assumed that power could change hands, that legitimacy could shift, that heaven, not empire, determined who truly ruled. In asking it publicly, the Magi destabilized Jerusalem, exposed Herod, and revealed how unprepared the world was for a king who did not look the part. That question still confronts every generation. The wise men represent something universal in the human story, the search for meaning that goes beyond comfort, tradition, and control. They were not desperate men clinging to hope. They were accomplished, educated, respected figures who nonetheless recognized that knowledge alone was not enough. Their learning led them not to arrogance, but to movement. They followed truth even when it unsettled their assumptions. This is what sets them apart. They remind us that wisdom is not proven by how much one knows, but by what one is willing to follow. Throughout history, countless people have studied religion without moving an inch closer to transformation. Jerusalem's scholars could quote prophecy precisely, yet never made the short journey to Bethlehem. Herod understood the threat, but chose preservation over truth. The wise men alone combined knowledge with obedience, and that combination changed everything. Their journey also reframes how God engages the world. The Magi were not part of the covenant community. They did not grow up with Israel's law or rituals, yet revelation reached them in a language they understood. God met them through the stars, then led them to Scripture, then guided them through dreams. Step by step, light was given according to willingness to walk. This pattern still holds. Revelation is rarely overwhelming all at once. It unfolds in stages, inviting trust at each turn. The wise men did not know the full story when they set out. They did not foresee Herod's violence, the flight into Egypt, or the suffering implied by myrrh. They only knew *enough to begin. And beginning was everything. Their willingness to leave safety behind exposes one of the great illusions of spiritual life. That truth should cost nothing. The Magi paid with time, comfort, certainty, and risk. Their obedience placed them in political danger. Their question triggered violence they never intended. Following the light did not make them immune to consequence, yet they followed anyway. This challenges the romanticized version of faith that promises ease. The story of the wise men insists that genuine pursuit of truth will disrupt systems, unsettle power, and sometimes place the innocent at risk, not because truth is cruel, but because false power always reacts violently when exposed. And yet, the story does not end in despair. Herod dies, his kingdom fractures, his name becomes synonymous not with greatness, but with fear. The child lives, quietly, patiently, growing in obscurity until the time comes. Empires pass, thrones crumble. The kingdom the wise men glimpsed endures. This contrast is deliberate. The wise men saw, in seed form, what the world would later witness in fullness, that the most enduring power does not announce itself with force. It arrives humbly. It invites rather than coerces. It conquers not through domination, but through self-giving love. That is why their story refuses to remain in the past. Every age produces its own Herods, systems built on fear, control, and insecurity. Every age also produces its Jerusalems, centers of religion or culture that know the language of truth, but hesitate to follow it. And every age still waits for wise men, people willing to journey beyond comfort, ask dangerous questions, and kneel where others stand back. The Magi also redefined success. They did not build institutions. They did not write texts we can quote. They did not remain close to the center of power. They fulfilled their task and stepped away. Their faithfulness was complete without recognition. In a world obsessed with legacy, they model obedience without applause. They trusted that truth did not need them to manage it. That may be their most radical lesson. The story ends as it began, with movement. They return home by another route, changed. The road is different because they are different. Encounter with truth never leaves a person unchanged, even when it leaves no visible trace. And somewhere along that road, the question lingers, where is the king? It is not merely historical, it is personal, it is ongoing. Is he found where power gathers, where fear rules, where comfort is protected? Or is he found where humility kneels, where truth is recognized, where wisdom is willing to travel? The wise men answer without speaking. They point not to a throne, but to a child, not to domination, but to devotion, not to certainty, but to trust. And in doing so, they leave us with a choice that every generation must make for itself, whether to remain where we are, or to follow the light we have been given, however far it leads. That is why their story still matters, because the star may fade, the road may end, the Magi may disappear, but the question they ask still shines, and it is waiting for anyone wise enough to follow. The story of the wise men is not a gentle ornament of the nativity. It is a mirror held up to every generation. These were not men driven by comfort, tradition, or power. They were seekers of truth, willing to move when the light moved, willing to kneel when pride demanded they stand. Their journey reminds us that wisdom is not found in proximity to religion, nor in control of power, but in obedience to revelation. Kings trembled, cities slept, and scholars hesitated, yet the wise traveled, worshipped, and changed the course of history through a single act of surrender. The star has faded, the road has ended, but the question remains, where is the king? And more importantly, will we follow when the answer disrupts everything we expect? If this story stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe for more deep, untold biblical stories, share it with someone who loves truth, and drop a comment below. Let's keep the conversation going.